Standing on the hallowed grounds of Arlington National Cemetery, I watched two armed security officers march directly toward me with cold precision. The man pointing them in my direction was my ex-boyfriend Bradley, who was convinced I was a fraud who did not belong in my military uniform. He was creating a scene right in front of his grieving family. My name is Captain Valerie, and I served as the officer in charge of military funeral honors on those sacred grounds. Bradley had spent 3 full years belittling my career and treating my service like a useless costume. He had no idea that he was standing on my operational grounds, about to humiliate himself in front of dozens of observers. Growing up in my household meant living in the constant shadow of my mother, Sylvia, and her adored youngest son, Brandon. Brandon was celebrated for every minor achievement, while my military career was treated as an awkward phase that nobody wanted to discuss. My mother introduced my brother with immense pride, but she always mentioned my service with vague indifference. When I met Bradley as a young lieutenant, he initially enjoyed showing off pictures of me in uniform to impress his acquaintances at dinner parties. However, as my duties required long deployments and heavy responsibilities, his artificial pride turned into quiet resentment. He constantly minimized my work, convincing himself that his commercial sales job was far more significant than my military service. The breaking point occurred during a family dinner at a restaurant when a retired officer named Colonel Henderson asked me a respectful question about my unit. Before I could answer, Bradley loudly mocked my role, claiming that I performed glorified secretarial work in a costume. My mother laughed right along with him, proving to me that she stood firmly on his side. That cruel moment shattered my desire to keep explaining my worth to people who refused to listen. The only person in my family who ever truly respected my commitment was my grandfather, Grandpa Arthur, a proud veteran who attended every single one of my ceremonies. After he passed away, I stopped begging for validation and silently focused on my duty. Months after Bradley and I quietly went our separate ways, I received a new assignment as the lead coordinator for full military honors at Arlington. It was a somber responsibility that demanded absolute perfection, reverence, and emotional strength. I never mentioned this assignment to my family because I knew they would never understand the gravity of the work. One morning, an official request form landed on my desk for an honored veteran who had recently passed away. Reading through the family documentation, I froze when I recognized the name of the deceased veteran as the grandfather of Bradley. Out of hundreds of thousands of graves, fate had brought his family directly into my operational sphere of duty. I could have easily transferred the file to another officer to avoid personal conflict, but I chose to stand my ground and perform my duty. That morning, I inspected my ribbon rack, adjusted my dress blues, and prepared to fulfill my obligation to the deceased soldier. I knew that my presence would be professional, dignified, and completely unyielding. The ceremony opened under a gray sky with absolute precision as the honor guard guided the casket toward the gravesite. I stood off to the side in my official capacity as officer in charge, maintaining silent military posture. Suddenly, Bradley looked across the lawn, spotted me in full uniform, and immediately marched forward with rage in his eyes. He began shouting at the top of his lungs, demanding that security remove me from the premises for wearing a uniform he claimed I never earned. His family gasped in terror as he disrupted the solemn ceremony, creating a scene that threatened to ruin the service. I stood completely still without blinking, refusing to grant him the reaction he desperately wanted. Right in the middle of playing taps, the bugler abruptly cut the notes short on command from Command Sergeant Major Holloway. The massive senior soldier stepped into the aisle with overwhelming authority, raising his hand to halt the entire service. He ordered Bradley to shut his mouth and step back from an active military operation immediately. Sergeant Major Holloway informed the entire crowd that I was Captain Valerie, the officer commanding the entire ceremonial detail on federal property. He revealed that I had personally coordinated honors for over 200 fallen service members and was requested directly for this service. The gathered crowd gasped as Bradley turned pale, realizing the truth of his mistake. My mother, who was sitting in the second row of mourners, watched the entire encounter with a look of utter humiliation. Colonel Henderson gave me a subtle nod of deep respect from the back row as Bradley slunk back to his seat in absolute shame. The bugler resumed playing taps, filling the air with honor that no foolish outburst could destroy. Weeks after the event, my mother attempted to call me to explain her past behavior, but I allowed the call to go to voicemail. When we eventually spoke, her vague apology did not undo years of neglect, but I accepted it calmly without expectation. My brother sent a hesitant text message expressing sudden respect, which I acknowledged with polite distance. Bradley never contacted me again, and I learned later through mutual contacts that he was deeply humbled by his own public downfall. He had spent years trying to make me feel small, only for the truth to dismantle his arrogance in front of everyone he knew. He was left to sit with his own dishonor while I continued moving forward with purpose. Today, I continue my service at Arlington alongside fellow soldiers who respect the weight of the uniform without requiring explanations. My grandfather would have been proud to see that I allowed quiet truth to speak louder than any hostile voice. When you build a life on real substance, you never have to defend yourself against those who doubt your worth.